everyone. Thank you so much for joining the call. The response to this webinar offer has been really, really phenomenal. As Duncan mentioned, I am a consulting director with the Tamarack Institute, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to two gentlemen whose work has certainly been an inspiration to me, Ed Meehan and Ron Dendas, Ron, from the Ryder Pool Foundation in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So let me tell you a little bit about both of our guests today. Ed Meehan, since '83, has served as the executive director of two philanthropies with combined assets of more than $90 million in Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley region, the Dorothy Ryder Pool Healthcare Trust, and the Ryder Pool Foundation. In his capacity, Ed works closely with Lehigh Valley Health Network to enable it to be a superior regional hospital and to have demonstrable, dramatic, and sustained impact on the health of the citizens of that region. Under Ed's leadership, the Ryder Pool Foundation has focused on a larger goal as well of building community through work in human services, the arts, public education, and community development, really getting at those social determinants of health. The establishment of Building 21 in Allentown School District, the development of the Promise neighborhood of the Lehigh Valley, and the creation of the Collective Impact Fellowship are beautiful examples of this work in action. Ed has served on numerous national, state, and local nonprofit boards focused on community health, philanthropy, education, the arts, and children's services. Welcome, Ed. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our second presenter today, Ron Dendas. Ron is a program officer with the Dorothy Ryder Pool Healthcare Trust and the Ryder Pool Foundation. He co-creates grants that use place-based strategies and cross-sector partnership to improve community well-being by addressing social determinants such as housing, access to physical and behavioral health care, and education. At the center of this work is the Ryder Pool Collective Impact Fellowship, an innovative leadership development movement that builds the capacity and connectivity between numerous nonprofit and public sectors. Ron has a Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice from St. Anselm's New Hampshire College and a Master's of Science in Human Organization Science from Villanova University. He is an American Hospital Association Creating Healthy Communities Fellow. The program that we're speaking about today, the Collective Impact Fellowship, is funded by the Ryder Pool Foundation. So welcome to Ed and Ron.
Thank you, Sylvia. We appreciate it.
Well, we're really looking forward to working with you to profile what, in my opinion, is a really exciting leadership and community change initiative. Maybe we can kick it off by asking you all to give folks on the line a bit of an overview of the Collective Impact Fellowship Initiative in Allentown and the intent behind it.
Well, thank you again, Sylvia. It's good to be with you, and we're really happy to share what we've learned with Ryder Pool Foundation. A couple of things just by way of background in terms of the intent behind it. Two things that I'd like to share with you. One is that there's been a tremendous renaissance in the Lehigh Valley, particularly in Allentown. There has been favorable changes in the public sector that would encourage and enable private sector investment in the downtown. And we've been very interested and concerned about the hollowing out of our center cities, suburban sprawl, and depletion of green space. So the private sector investments in the renaissance of downtown puts tremendous wind in the sails of the Lehigh Valley, the entire region, and then enables us to think a little bit about, okay, given our work and the economic engine of the downtown, which is probably about $1 billion worth of investment in downtown just in the last couple of years, heading probably towards $2 billion, how do we think about our work with Ryder Pool Foundation and think about housing in the adjacent neighborhoods, about the health of the communities in the surrounding neighborhoods, about educational attainment, early childhood, high school graduation, all the things that are important to us, the things that we contribute to and help think about in the community. So there's that dynamic. And the other thing that I'd mention by way of background is in 2012, we did interviews with 84 civic leaders throughout the Lehigh Valley, key informant interviews. And our intent was to develop a profile of current dynamics, think about things that could either help or hinder our broad strategy and anything we might want to do on a proactive basis. We found and learned many, many, many things, but for today's purposes, what I'd like to highlight are two things. One of the things that we got back resoundingly from 84 community leaders was that there was a lack of connectedness. They described it as services in silos for the not-for-profit community. They also described it as social isolation, and really kind of people kind of trying to solve problems on their own, both clients, patients, students, as well as agencies that were kind of disconnected. Also, resounding, overwhelming sense of a need for a new kind of leadership, a need to think about leadership in a different kind of way. Those two things, the renaissance of the downtown, the new economic engine, combined with a sense of community leadership saying that there's a need for a new kind of leadership, got us thinking about how do we modify the Ryder Pool Foundation strategy. And so we held a civic symposium. We had, maybe a couple hundred people at DeSales University in 2013. It was very successful. It was a very good day. But as many of you, I'm sure, have experienced, it was a day. It didn't give us a chance to think about how do we continue this conversation? How do we expand on this work? And how do we make it operational and more real and sustainable? So that's where I'd say that we began to think about leadership development in the not-for-profit realm. And that's where I'll turn it over to Ron to give more details on that.
Thanks, Ed. And you can see in the picture here, just compare and contrast the old downtown Allentown on the left, which was really retail driven, and when all the retail stores left, it really kind of left a core of vacant storefronts. And then on the right, some of the new revitalization that's happening. When you go 2 blocks out, though, it's it's a tale of two cities. You have incredible health disparities, housing issues, et cetera, all of those social determinants that we talk so often about. When we are sitting around thinking about, all right, there's a call for new leadership. We want to find new ways of doing business. We do what we do all the time, and that's we start talking to other people. And we had numerous conversations with nonprofit leaders about how do we get at this? How do we take advantage of all of this economic development to encourage community development? And we heard some real reoccurring themes from the nonprofit leaders. There was real frustration with how funders mandated collaboration. There was frustration with the way collaboration had played out. Now, remember, this is just as this concept of collective impact is making its way across the country. Everybody wants to be doing collective impact. And, nonprofit leaders would find themselves in scenarios where they'd be with 50, 60 other people in a room saying, okay, we've got to solve this problem. And they'd never be able to get traction there. They were also frustrated with the fact that they acknowledged that there needed to be work with other sectors. If I'm in health, I need to work with folks in education. If I'm in education, I need to be working with folks in housing. But I don't know the folks. I'm unfamiliar with these sectors. I'm kind of stuck in my silo. So what we started thinking about is how do we develop the capacity to get at some of these issues? And quite simply, how do we think about place and space? It was easy thinking about place because we had, as Ed said, $1 billion of economic development and neighborhoods surrounding all of this development that needed a lot of work. What we really lacked was space. And when I talk about space, I talk about the place where nonprofit leaders can come together and think about how they address collaboration and how they understand how other systems work. And that was really kind of the birth of the Collective Impact Fellowship, which is a place-based leadership development. What we did is we started identifying up to 12 nonprofit leaders, all who work in the same community, but who represent different sectors. And we wanted to create that space for them to come and connect. What we do is we developed curriculum, and our curriculum are based on 9 key areas of collaboration that include a deep dive into collective impact, leadership for achievement, communication and messaging, logic model, evaluating multiple system partnerships. We identified faculty from around the country, from now with Sylvia joining our faculty internationally, to come to the Lehigh Valley and facilitate small group conversations amongst these 12 nonprofit leaders about how you get at some of these issues. One of the most valuable things that we hear from the nonprofit leaders is the gift of protected time, the ability to have a full 1 day, 2 day, 3 days of meeting with colleagues with incredible facilitators in the room and actually have the dedicated protected time to think through some of these issues. Another key part of the fellowship is that we provide nonprofit leaders with stipends. So we value their time, we value the time of the organization, and we make sure they're compensated for taking part in this work. After the second cohort, so every year we select 12 fellows. Our goal was to do 5 years and 50 fellows. We are currently in our 5th year, and if things progress as expected, we will graduate our 50th fellow this year. After the second cohort, when we were doing a wrap-up session, the group said, we don't want to leave. We kind of like this. We like the space. We want to keep this going. We want to continue to learn. We want to do a better job of connecting with the first cohort, and we want to have the ability to connect with future cohorts. And so there was the birth of our community of practice, where once a month, all of the cohorts get together. It's hosted by one of the fellows. We break bread together, we have a meal, and then jump into an issue that is selected by one of the fellows and enter into a discussion around issues that are relevant to our work. And so that's that first box in the lower left-hand corner. The work of the fellowship and the community practice has led to several other capacity building efforts that I won't go into as great detail over, but I want to touch on them briefly. And these are really kind of fellow initiated opportunities where they said, okay, we've got to do a better job of sharing data. And so a couple of fellows got together and started pulling groups together to say, what does data sharing look like? How do we come up with data sharing agreements? How do we create a data platform where we can share data amongst ourselves, turn it into useful information, and submit that information on a broader basis? One fellow involved in community engagement said, how do we take this fellowship idea and use it on community leaders and help them develop the skills and capacity to do this work? And I believe, Sylvia, you've featured that in one of the Tamarack webinars.
Yeah, it's called Leadership Without Limits.
There you go, thank you. That led to conversations around what does collective impact and cross-sector partnership really look like, and when is it really collaboration? We would see a lot of things where people would say, we're doing collaboration, but it looked a little bit more like coordination or cooperation. So some of the fellows actually got together and created a readiness scan to say, we don't want to become the collective impact police, but here are the things that you really should have in place if you're going to be thinking about doing collective impact. And that led us to the development of a rapid prototyping grant-making process. What we were finding with this work was a lot of folks, because of the way funding was being distributed, they'd have 6 weeks to put a collaboration together because there's an RFP. And that led to a phenomenon where we were really kind of focusing on go, and then after we got the money, thinking about ready, set, instead of a more logical process of ready, set, and then go. And what rapid prototyping has allowed us to do is to provide a little bit of funding for convening groups to think about the process of ready and set before jumping to go.
And it's beautiful to see, from my perspective, how you had some core principles and some needs that you were attempting to respond to, but also that it's quite emergent. You know, things that you wouldn't necessarily have determined would necessarily be part of this effort have started to emerge as you've engaged these system leaders in the work, which I think is pretty cool. So just to recap, it's a 9-month, like it's a 1-year commitment that you ask of these folks?
well, as one of the fellows says quite often, it's like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Because it's relationships on that, yeah?
It's a 9 month, the curriculum is 9 months, but these folks just keep convening and keep kind of building on this work. So we're in year 5 and we're as strong in this work as ever.
You know, one of the things that, you know, from someone outside the community looking in, I have noted one of, Canada's Minister of Economic and Social Development made the observation that you cannot have sustainable economic development if you don't ensure that a social development happens alongside. And theoretically, I absolutely agree with it. But what excites me when I look at this is the extent to which you're actually making that happen. You're creating pathways to ensure that it happens. As a funder yourself, what's been unique for you both around the role that you've played in the design and implementation of this fellowship? And how is it different from other types of grant making that you do?
Sylvia, let me just kind of, again, by way of background, the Ryder Pool Foundation was founded in 1957. Dorothy Ryder Pool and Leonard Parker Pool were not originally from the Lehigh Valley, but it was their adopted home, and they were much in love with it, and they were very committed, caring, civic leaders. And so we've had a tradition with our deep, long roots in the Lehigh Valley for a long time, and we have had a tradition of engaged and thoughtful and very caring trustees who very much pay attention to the activities of the region, and very thoughtful about how you think about Ryder Pool Foundation and what role can we play. So we think a great deal about what role we play and how our role can change and evolve, emergent, as you said. We've got tremendous encouragement from our trustees to be creative, to be proactive, and to really think about how we can use the limited resources that we have in meaningful ways. So, you know, in an evolutionary way, I would say that maybe 5 or so years ago, 100% of everything we did was pretty responsive, fairly traditional grant-making process. By 2019 or 2018, about 80% of our work is proactive, and I think by 2019, that percentage will increase. So we continue our place-based approach. We have a more expanded proactive role. We're thinking less about any one individual grant, but we're thinking about capacity building and the mutually supportive and interactive approaches to health, education, housing, and all the things that we're doing. So to a great extent, we're doing new things and different things, but very much in the tradition of the Ryder Pool Foundation, very consistent on a logic progression of thinking, how do you do this work well, and playing to our strengths. And we've learned that one of the things that a local funder can do that other sectors of the community cannot is we have an ability to convene, we have an ability to facilitate, we have an ability to champion perhaps an unpopular idea that is worth looking at. We can be more flexible and more adroit than many other sectors of the community. And if we use those kind of skills and that understanding of what role we play, we can make a more impactful play a more impactful role in the work of the community. Ron, what are your thoughts on that?
I certainly agree with all that. For us, the ability of co-creating, of sharing power, of being partners in this work with folks has been, I think, unique, and has kind of led us to the development of our theory of change. I apologize for the busyness of this, and I just want to walk you through this quickly because it gives you a little bit of insight into kind of what's happening in our heads. You see in the squares, we're talking about all of those capacity building efforts that I described a few minutes ago. And our ultimate goal here is to get into that cultural capital circle that you see in the upper right-hand corner. And we're basing this work off of Community Capital Framework by our friend Mary Emery from South Dakota State University. She helped us kind of think through some of this work, and it's proven to be really valuable for us. Our cultural capital goal here is really changing the way our systems collaborate and work together. And if we really want to see sustainable, positive changes in how cross-sector partnerships work, we really need to start in that lower left-hand corner of built social capital. There needs to be connectivity, there needs to be trust and relationships amongst the sectors if we really want to see this develop. When we see built social capital develop, then there's a greater chance that data are being shared, that understanding of how sectors work is being shared. That's all turning into greater information about the problems that we're trying to solve. When we have a deeper understanding of the problems that we're trying to solve, it makes makes inclusion a lot easier. Because rather than try and get everybody that's involved in a particular issue around the table, when we let data drive discovery and when we let data dispel the myths around some of the problems that we're trying to deal with, now we have a much clearer vision of the right people around the table. And as to use a Tamarack quote, to make sure that we have the context experts at the table as well as the content experts, now we're creating bridging social capital because we have the right people around the table to solve the problem that we understand much deeper now. When we have those folks around the table, now is when we can start doing the ready, set, go. Now, what's the transformational behavior that we want to start addressing that will help us create that cultural capital that we're trying to get at? This theory of change allows us to kind of test early and often what we're doing, and Sylvia, as you so astutely pointed out, it allows emerging ideas to get some traction. So we're getting a lot of good stuff coming out of using a framework like this.
The intentional nurturing of prototypes is really, really exciting, I think, as you think from a social capital framework. I really love this. When you think back and you think about your experiment and your investment very intentionally, and you mentioned so much of this work being relational, what are the things that you all look for in determining who might be a really good candidate to be part of the Collective Impact Fellowship Program? I would guess, after a few cohorts, you probably have people knocking on your door saying, hey, I should be in the next cohort. And so I'm curious, how do you make those decisions?
Sylvia, I'll jump back to the comment you made a few minutes ago about how our work is interactive and emergent. We have a sense of where we want to go, but we keep a very open mind as the work evolves. There are core things that that are central to our work, but we're pretty adaptable and flexible as we go forward. So I think we've gotten better and smarter about how we think about the cohorts for each year. The obvious, now that we have 5 years worth of cohorts, is we have 50 people who we can ask, who do you think would make a good fellow for the coming year? So in keeping with the process, that's part of what we do. We do have several things that we are very mindful of. The Lehigh Valley is a reasonably big place, and we want to be mindful of geography. We're trying to think about representation from various communities. We've had a lot of emphasis on Allentown in the initial years, but we need to think through that as we evolve. We want to think about sector representation, and so we've tried to stretch ourselves and the fellows to say, let's not just have human service professionals or youth service agency professionals. Let's think about education. Let's think about the arts. Think about transportation. Think about folks that might come from a different perspective that would really contribute to the fellowship. We've certainly thought about folks who are in the ascendancy of their careers, people who could take this information maybe early or mid-career, who could use this information in a way that would be meaningful and make contributions to the community for 5 or 10 or 20 years to come. And because of our sense of all the various survey work that we've done, we've had a very strong emphasis on having more women invited and more people of color invited, with a look to how do we think about leadership development going forward and the leadership we'll need in the future. So expectations of fellows, this is something that we say very, very often, and we tell the fellows, if there's integrity in the process, we never worry about the outcome. Oftentimes fellows are saying, what do you expect of me? What's going to happen at the end? If there's integrity in the process, we never worry about the outcome. So, dear fellow, please be present, be your authentic self, trust the process, and just enjoy the journey. And we found that, there's a little bit of nervousness about it sometimes, but if we could just ask people to just be their present selves and just trust the process, things come out pretty well. Does it come out the way we expect all the time? No, but we're fine with the outcome as long as everybody abides by the collegial nature of our work.
And every fellow, we sign a memorandum of understanding with them of what they can expect from us and what we can expect from them, and we make sure that their boards also sign on. We don't want an angry board member saying, hey, why is my executive director always out of the office at one of your fellowship things? So we want to make sure that everybody knows the commitment, because to be a fellow, it is a commitment. It's about 150 to 180 hours of their time that is focusing on fellowship activities. So we want to be really clear up front of what the expectations are. We also ask every fellow to pay it forward. And we've come up with a rubric of 4 ways that we would hope that fellows take this opportunity and pay it forward and turn this into action. The first one is to take the learnings of the fellowship and go back to your organization and impact the culture of your individual organization. Secondly is we ask fellows to pay it forward by helping us with this continuous capacity building. And I mentioned a couple of examples about how a couple of fellows helped create a data platform, how they look at readiness scans. So they've been really active in helping us create and build on capacity. Third is to coach, navigate, volunteer with an organization that's trying to do this work and help them think through how they can do cross-sector partnerships better. And the fourth way of paying it forward is to be an actual partner in a cross-sector collaboration. Nearly all of the fellows are active in paying it forward. We've had very, very little attrition, which is kind of really outstanding. We haven't lost a lot of fellows in activity. A couple of them have left the area. Actually, one of them is moving back to the area. One fellow who was involved in education, her background was she had started a lot of schools in Africa, and came over back to the United States, was working here, was invited to be a fellow. After the fellowship, she ended up going back to Africa to do more education work, and we thought, she was a great fellow, we're really sorry to lose her. We got an email from her a couple of weeks ago telling us how she's using the information that she developed in the fellowship to work with World Health Organization doctors and nurses and students to increase the number of people in isolated villages that are getting vaccines. So here's an educator who's saying, if I want to continue to impact on education, I've got to address health. How do I take lessons learned from the fellowship in isolated villages in Africa? So this is having more of an impact than we ever imagined going in.
I just think that is incredible. Incredible. I love that phrase. I've noted it down. If the process has integrity, we don't have to worry about the outcomes. Did you have trouble convincing your trustees that was something that mantra was important? Because you have accountabilities as well, right? For your experiment?
We do have accountability, and we take the stewardship of the resources of the Ryder Pool Foundation and the Pool Healthcare Trust very seriously. This is the legacy of Leonard and Dorothy Pool, and our trustees are excellent stewards of those resources. And so we we take that very seriously, and we're very intentional and deliberate in our work. As I said, you can follow our logic progression about how we think about this, and it takes us down a pathway of saying these things are important. We think we can make, we think we have an opportunity to make almost a unique contribution to the collective success of the and quality of life of the Lehigh Valley. So yeah, we keep our trustees very informed, and they tend to give us very good advice, very good cautions, and encourage us to proceed.
So let's jump ahead to that, and maybe if you could, I'd love to have you share a little bit about what you're starting to see now in terms of your investment in cultivating cross-sector leadership and supporting innovative community work. What's happening?
I would say this is very qualitative, and I would say that over the holidays, I don't think I was at one holiday gathering when someone or several people didn't come up to me and say, "How's that fellowship going? Boy, what are the fellows working on? What's happening next?" So there's a buzz 5 years in that's very, very positive, and it's just very heartening to see. To go to a community meeting and realize that, in a room full of people, 2 or 3 or 4 of the collective impact fellows from various years are playing leadership roles in some of the good community work in the various neighborhoods. So it's sort of still very anecdotal that I would describe, but it's very heartening to see. And just to see the fellows use approaches, expressions, shorthand with one another. Just kind of the things that colleagues do, there's a team out there that didn't exist, and we helped contribute to that. So that's just, as I said, anecdotal. I know that Ron is working on very much more rigorous approaches.
Well, and along that same line, yes, we try and incorporate evaluation into this, but I don't need an evaluation to see it working. Every day I get to see some aspect of this thing working in some form. We do use qualitative and quantitative evaluative methods here to mark our progress. We really want evaluation more for discovery. Okay, what are we learning about this work, and how do we take what we learn and integrate it back into the work? I just kind of highlighted 3 of those capitals that we're trying to increase. And we use a technique called ripple effect mapping, which uses appreciative inquiry to start identifying the but-fors, the activities that happen but for the fellowship. If I didn't know this person, this wouldn't have happened. If I wasn't at this meeting, this wouldn't happen. And how do you follow those ripples out and start measuring some of the capital that we're trying to grow here? And what we've seen is overwhelming connectivity between sectors. There are people who worked across the street from one another who never knew each other, and the work that they're doing now is really, really outstanding. So we're seeing that connectivity. We're seeing data being shared by folks that traditionally don't share data. We're seeing law enforcement and health sharing data around mental health issues that are providing deeper insight into how we address mental health in the Lehigh Valley. So we're seeing incredible increase in human capital. And the way Hassan is doing Leadership Without Limits, pretty soon we're going to have more community leaders than we are collective impact fellows. So we're seeing the bridging social capital, and we're trying to find ways to bring all of this together. We're also starting to kind of see now some of that transformational behavior. How we address suicide and other deaths of despair, we're taking different approaches. How we address pregnant women who are opioid addicted. How we address law enforcement's approach to people who are in crisis because of mental health are all starting to evolve and change. Ed, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, Ron, I would add that Sylvia, you asked how our trustees feel about this work. One of the indicators of how things are working with this is that the board members, the board chairs, the executive directors of agencies where the fellows work are beginning to see the value add. So when there's better work being done, or there's the grant that's obtained, or there's a pending challenge that was addressed in a way that was efficient and meaningful, board members from the not-for-profit agencies are beginning to see the value add, which then again reinforces the gestalt that this is worthwhile and this is worth doing. It's labor intensive, it's hard work, and oh boy, we're beginning to see results.
This is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So what's next for you folks with respect to the fellowship? What are your thoughts? Where to from here? You made a 5-year commitment that, as you said at the start, is just coming to an end. Where do you go from here?
Well, I think, again, true to our process, we have asked the Collective Impact Fellows, Ron and Elspeth and Sylvia, you were kind enough to help with a retreat that we had where 33 out of the 50 fellows participated in a day-long event. And we've got tremendous feedback, very candid, solid feedback, and Ron can give you more details on that. But where are we going? Well, we're listening to our colleagues.
Yeah, we're currently taking all that information and trying to figure out, all right, what's the next step? There will be continuous steps in this work. We're all really big fans of Roger's adoption of innovation, and I think what we've tried to do here is create, again, place and space for innovation to happen. And we've got an incredible group of early adopters, and I think we've done a really nice job of creating place and space. But it's the fellows that have taken this and really created the connectivity, created the shared data. It's their work that really is creating this world that we want to work in, this environment that we want to work in. So our goal for the future is continue to support these early adopters until this becomes the norm of how we all behave when trying to tackle some complex social issues.
I really want to applaud you for the innovation, the leadership, and the willingness to make investment in, quite a unique process when the outcome, you were clear on what you were striving toward, but whether you would get there was not necessarily clear. That's risk-taking. That is the work of the innovator. Quick question for you. For those folks on the line, as we move into creating some space for folks on the line to ask their own questions, I wonder, what advice would you offer to other communities or other funders who want to undertake kind of large-scale collaborative work or capacity building work, leadership kind of nurturing? What advice? What are the key pieces that you've learned after 5 years that you wish you'd known going in that would have helped?
Yes, Sylvia, it's a great question. I'll come at it from the perspective of funder, and we touched on this already about what can a local funder do that's almost unique in their role if they choose, or what can they do that is supportive and helpful to the larger community in ways that maybe other sectors of the community might have more difficulty. So, again, one of the things we talk about very often at Ryder Pool Foundation is we don't visit the homebound. We don't read to the kids. We don't care for the sick. What we do is we support all the wonderful people who do that work, and then we're only as good as those people we fund. So how do we think about that work? How do we think about this approach? And then how do we, therefore, approach this work with a real sense of humility and a real sense of service, that we want to be supportive. We have to know our role and how we can make the best contribution. So another thing we talk about very, very often is this is a long game. So as a funder, if you're thinking about this kind of pathway, this is not a one-year grant or a 3-year grant. And if you're thinking that you're going to see, phenomenal success in a 3-year grant or even a 5-year grant, maybe you want to think about it a little bit. If you really want to do this work, you really have to think about the commitment. Don't start unless you're prepared to go down a pathway that's going to take some time, because this is very labor intensive, as I mentioned, and the success is measured over some duration. I would also say prepare to be stretched, prepare to be challenged, prepare to learn a lot, and maintain that sense of optimism and flexibility that we've discussed.
I think for me, what's so refreshing is that long-term view, right? Taking a long-term view when so many other funding approaches are for good and bad reasons, very short-term focused. That's a real uniqueness that I think you bring. So we're now moving toward the Q&A portion of our session with Ron and Ed. I know that a couple of you have already posted questions to Duncan, but if you do have a question that's bubbling, please feel free to either send it to Duncan via Twitter or post it in the chat box if you are participating through the computer.
Sylvia, the first question we have is from Joel, and he says, "Aloha from Hawaii Island. Would you be able to tell us more about rapid prototyping grants, types of projects, the time period, grant amounts, etc., just to give some further understanding?"
This was, we really kind of started off saying, if we only gave people, 3 to 6 months to think through how this problem might be solved, if we gave them that dedicated time, and what we learned really on is there's nothing rapid about rapid prototyping. Pulling people together and trying to kind of wrap brains around these problems takes time. So the grants have been relatively small. They are unsolicited. We meet with some folks that are doing interesting work, and we say, would you like to participate in rapid prototyping? Small grants, maybe $20,000, $25,000. Spend them as you want. The outcomes that we are expecting focus on things like there's a memorandum of understanding amongst folks around the table. There's rules of engagement of how we're going to move forward. We're looking at the best data possible to solve problems. We've started doing this around things like suicide prevention. We started doing this around youth homelessness, around mental health in the criminal justice system, and just started one around art and health, the impact that art can have on overall community health.
Yeah, we've learned over the years that you can make the 3-year or 5-year grant, and it takes 4 to 6 years to find out whether you succeeded or not. And so part of the rapid prototyping idea is, how do you fail fast? How do we take a relatively small amount of money, kind of walk through the rubric, and it's okay to fail as long as we've documented the process, which then gives us all more information to work with. And we think that it'll be a more efficient way than making the mega multi-year grant, on the front end. Just kind of the relatively small investment, and Ron has done such a great job in helping everybody think through that. But the idea of failing fast and then lessons learned gives us a chance to reposition, reconfigure, and think about how we take the next approach. The problem's not going away. We just have to get smarter about approaching the problem.
Fail fast, try it out, see what works, learn from it, go again.
Our next question is from Terry, and Terry asks, what efforts has Riderpool made to coordinate their efforts with other funders in your area so that funders aren't working in silos either? Are you working in this area, and how's it going? What are the challenges or successes?
We have a really great informal network of funders across the Lehigh Valley. We don't have anything organized like a regional association of grant makers or a formal funders collaborative of any way. But what we do on a fairly regular basis, and been doing this for years now, is when there's an emergent issue in the community, we can get the funders together and have a conversation about it. If anyone's working on anything that they'd like everyone to know, that information is shared. We are very respectful of the mission and charter of every one of the funders. We've all been, most of us are private foundations, a few family foundations, a few corporate foundations. We all have different spaces and places in which we work. You have to honor that and respect that, and understand that different people are going to be able to do different things. Different organizations have different styles. We are getting really good about describing our approach and our role, and kind of what position we're playing in this larger experiment of improving the quality of life in the Lehigh Valley. So the conversations are good, and we hope that we have things to share with our local funder colleagues as well as we do on this call.
And one of the suggestions that came from our collective impact fellows were, hey, can we start getting funders as part of the fellowship? And so for the last 2 years, we've had funder representation as one of the sectors for cohort 4 and cohort 5, and it's proven to be really enlightening for all involved.
I really welcome this wisdom. It's interesting. You can tell from even just these first 2 questions, you know, an eagerness to sort of glean pieces from this that can be adapted and applied in communities far and wide. Do we have any other questions flowing in, Duncan?
Yeah, we have a couple. 2 of the questions are fairly similar, so I'm going to package them together. The first part is from Rachel, and Rachel says, "Aloha again from Hawaii Island. How can we learn more about the fellowship curriculum?" And that ties into another question that we got asking, what part of the curriculum have you found to be the most impactful for the fellows? Or what part of the process have you heard set them up for impact in the biggest way?
Well, first of all, since there's so many questions from Hawaii, we would love to come down and demonstrate how this works. First of all, we're really open with sharing, and so if it was Rachel, if you can get us your contact information, I'm happy to share the curriculum with you, the learning objectives, et cetera. The only thing that we ask is if you find better ways of doing it, please share. And if you use what we give you, just give us a shout out. But we're happy to share that with you. And I would never, it's like your children, never pick one over another. I think all of the sessions are informative.
I think that a local funder would have to think about what are the, you could take a look at our syllabus, no problem, and then you might want to think that this isn't the cookie cutter. What kind of things would need to be tailored to the unique circumstances of your organization or the community that you're working in? And that would be really important. So we've placed some emphasis on executive coaching for the fellows. We've placed some emphasis on community-based participatory research, but the entire syllabus we found is extremely important. And because we have multiple faculty from multiple disciplines, from multiple organizations coming in, the whole kind of smorgasbord helps. So one fellow might really have insight and have it resonate with them with one particular person who comes in for a day and a half, and another fellow might find value in a whole different session. So the whole package is working for us. But that said, I think it's important to think about what does the whole package look like for you in your work, and then kind of think about the totality of it in the overall syllabus and what the large takeaway is.
And just a quick piece, if you want to share, Ron and Ed, the curriculum, we can actually include it as a link in the follow-up materials as well for folks, if folks find that helpful.
Yeah, it's happy to share it, and it is our work. But I think the other thing that, as we're saying, if there's integrity in process and trust the process, there's more to than just saying, okay, if I just implement this syllabus, all will be well. It really takes a lot of reflection and thought about how you want to go about this work in service to your community.
I really appreciate that caveat. So it's a good guidepost, but only that, and not to forego your own knowledge and wisdom of your community. Hey, Duncan, I think we have time for one more question. Do you have one there?
Yeah, we have one final question, and thanks to everyone for submitting your questions, and apologies if we didn't have time to get to all of them. This question comes from Jane, and it's posed as another way to look at how to learn from the success that you've had in your fellowship program. Where do you find the trainers for the training, like the people you've brought in from outside for your fellows and rapid prototyping? How did you go about looking for people who could come into your context and help with your program?
Again, I think, and Ron, I'm sure will want to make some comment about this, but one of the things, again, as a funder that we think is important is not only do we try to maintain a really good understanding of the dynamics and forces that are at play in the community we serve, but we also have a responsibility to keep up with the literature and understand what's happening elsewhere. What are best practices? Who's doing the good work that we would really like to get in here? Frankly, it is right out of the DNA of Leonard Parker Poole and Dorothy Ryder Poole. Who's good at this? Where do we get them in here? How do we learn from that? Again, in keeping with our tradition and the legacy of Mr. and Mrs. Poole. So finding faculty is a matter of kind of keeping up with the literature, keeping up with the field, and not being shy about engaging and having relationships that you develop statewide, nationally, internationally, and bringing those talented folks in to help you in your community. So you're still place-based, you're still focused, but you have an eye to what's going on elsewhere. And that ability to be porous, again, is a contribution that you can make.
The only thing I can add to that is the faculty, once they get an opportunity to experience this, they're as excited about coming back as the fellows are having them back. So the people who have been on faculty for the last several years, they look forward to that call in September when we say, hey, can you come back for another session?
Well, gentlemen, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I wish that time didn't fly by as quickly as it has. I want to, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for the generosity of sharing and the honesty about, both the challenges, but also some of the promise that is starting to bear fruit because of your leadership and investment. And also a big thank you to folks on the line for taking time out of your busy days to learn and to keep abreast of what's going on in your field. Over to you, Duncan. If you could wrap us up, that would be lovely.
Thanks, Sylvia. I just have a couple quick announcements, just further learning opportunities and different ways to connect with us. Thanks again to Ed and Ron from the Ryder Poole Foundation for sharing their wisdom with us. You can learn more about the Ryder Poole Foundation at the link below and by connecting with them on LinkedIn. Thanks to Ed and Ron for sharing again. These links will also be included in the post-webinar email you'll get, along with a full recording of this call and a copy of the slides. We also do have a really interesting learning opportunity with the Tamarack Institute coming up March 19th and 20th. It's called Collective Impact, Leading Theory to Action, a Train the Trainer workshop. And you can join Tamarack's Liz Weaver and our very own Sylvia in Toronto for this 2-day workshop. And it's designed to build your capacity to mobilize, launch, and sustain collective impact initiatives by providing you with theory, resources, and opportunities to practice with and learn from your peers. So that's a really interesting learning opportunity coming up this March in Toronto. And in a few days, you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include a link to the audio recording of today's call, as well as the learning opportunities I've just mentioned. To learn more about upcoming learning opportunities, including workshops and free webinars like this one, you can visit us at www.tamarackcommunity.ca. We also encourage you to take a minute to complete a short webinar survey to offer feedback on how you enjoyed today's call. Thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Ed. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.